the rebels in the world, stand up. If you're a rebel on the grind, you don't care what they mind.
Welcome to the Brave Podcast. I'm your host, Connie Jacob. This week, I want to share with you a little bit about maybe why people feel alone. Now, you can be surrounded by a ton of people and still feel alone. And we can feel this individually. We can feel this in a room with other people. We can feel this in our marriages. We can feel this as a parent. We can feel this in our classrooms. And what I want to do is in this episode, I want to unpack how we can bring people closer. Many of you know that I've written 2 books on the concept of bringing the hurting closer. I've written one for parents, written one for educators, currently writing one on for couples. How do we bring one another closer? And when it comes to feeling alone, this is an epidemic that we are facing in our world right now. And oftentimes, if someone feels alone, they are going to behave in ways that they don't even want. And so behavior is communication. And so when you see someone lashing out or being judgmental or withdrawing, usually sometimes they feel either misunderstood or they might feel alone. This word alone keeps coming up. It even came up for me. For me, being alone came up early in my marriage. Now, a lot of people think that when you're married, you'll never be alone. You can feel alone in your home. And I know Brene Brown says not belonging in our homes is the worst kind of hurt. It brings an incredible amount of shame and isolation. And my husband and I are celebrating 25 years of being married this year. And so I have these reflections on how far we've come. I don't feel this way anymore, but I remember when we were early married and even when we had children, I remember saying to my husband a lot, I feel so alone. This would frustrate him because he's like, I'm right here. You're not alone. But I felt alone because I felt like I was holding up our family when we were going through a crisis. I felt like I was carrying that by myself because he had no capacity for it, not to any fault of his own. He didn't know how to understand the emotions that with that. He was working hard to provide for our family, but I felt alone. And that isolation that I felt, that aloneness that I felt, caused me to withdraw. I love Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly. She talks about when we withdraw and powerful concepts in there and why we withdraw. We will often withdraw from people when we feel alone, when we feel isolated, when we don't feel like people understand us. We see this in schools, kids avoiding school. School avoidance has gone up. Why? Because kids are lazy? I would really like to argue that. I think that a lot of times there is this feeling of disconnection with education, with their classmates, with their teacher, whatever the reasons. I feel surrounded, but I also feel alone. I was just talking to an educator today because I'm about to release an app for educators and teachers on how can we bring the hurting closer. I'm so excited. I cannot wait to release this app. And for those of you who don't know, I have a contest going on right now. It ends June 10th. So that's very, very soon. But if you want to speak into the app, please email me, Connie@conniejacob.com, JAKAB. Let me know what you want to have in this app. But I've been asking some of my educator friends and my parent friends, what do you want to see in this app? And one of the things that this educator brought up was she said, we don't need more information. We have so much information. What we need is instead of going wider, we need to go deeper. I love what she said. And it reminded me, and as we began to talk more and more, I realized that as she shared and unpacked that a little bit, what she was saying is we, the educators, feel alone. We have to find our own ways to figure out how to work with these kids. We have to find our own processes, our own systems, our own resources to work with our classroom. What we need is we need common language, we need systems, and we need processes that that actually create a school culture so that me, the educator, feel uplifted and supported, AKA not alone in this game. I can't tell you how many educators right now feel alone in the game. They're put in a classroom, you close the door behind them, and it's like, good luck. Out of those 30 kids, about 18 of them are dealing with some kind of, struggle behaviorally, developmentally, mentally. Good luck. You need resources? We don't have them. Talk about feeling alone. Many parents feel alone in their journey, trying to figure out, how do I help my child? I remember when we were going through a mental health crisis, I knocked on every door, pediatricians, psychiatrists, doctors, and I did get help. But let me tell you, it took knocking and knocking and knocking. I knocked on doors for 4 years, only to be referred here and there. And then finally, when we ended up in the hospital, I thought, great, we're going to get help. And even then, it still felt like the journey was just beginning. We paid, I think, $5,000 for an assessment. We emptied out our bank account in order to get it. And then we realized, oh, great, now we know what our diagnosis is, but we have no money left over for help. So I remember feeling really alone as a parent and trapped. Good luck in helping your kid. And I know so many parents feel the same way. I know other couples who are just barely hanging on by a thread in their marriage. Maybe they're sticking it out for their kids or they're sticking it out for whatever reasons, but they feel alone from one another. And so we have this interesting feeling, this collectiveness in our society, whether it's in our homes as couples, with our kids, teachers, workplaces are another place where people feel alone and isolated. They don't feel like there's a collective sense. And this is why creating culture is really important. And what I want to unpack just for the next few moments is, how do we bring people who feel alone closer? And how do we create the kind of culture where isolation is not the way we feel when we come home, when we go to our classrooms? And so I think the first step in helping people not feel alone is recognizing what alone feels like for us. Empathy is powerful. When we don't realize what alone feels like, then we might tell somebody, like, what do you mean you're alone? You're surrounded. We have no concept of that. And so when we think about the times when we've been surrounded by people but felt alone, allows us to go, oh yeah, I know how that feels. It also allows us to not gaslight somebody when they come to us and say, I'm feeling really alone in my classroom. I'm feeling like I don't have the supports. And the principal it's like, what are you talking about? I've given you all my resources. I've given you great Pro D days. What are you talking about? I mean, that's gaslighting. That they don't mean to, but they're dismissing that person. That person's experience at that point becomes invalid. And now they're thinking to themselves, well, never share with my staff again. I'll never share with my husband again. When we get shut down, we withdraw even more. And so empathy becomes our greatest tool in helping people not feel alone when they feel heard. This is really important. Empathy isn't us agreeing with somebody. Empathy is allowing for someone to know that you can share what you need to share here and that your experience is valid. That's basically what empathy is doing. From there, though, I don't know about you, but I feel that if we only have empathetic cultures, oh, that's really hard. I'm so sorry to hear. What ends up happening and what's happening in homes and in schools is that we have balls of frustration, like a snowball, getting bigger and bigger as years go on with no change. This is a problem. This is why, along with empathy, we now need to be committed to creating culture. How is culture created in a home, in a school? Well, it's created by language. But before we can create language, a common language where everybody kind of knows how we work here, we have to decide, what do we care about here? So the same educator that I was talking to today, she was sharing a little bit about how, we can't control what happens in the home, but we can control using that word loosely. We can control what happens in our school. So in our school, the kids will feel safe. That's what we value. And we will walk alongside of them to learn. That's what we have our hands on. We can't control how much screen time they're getting at home. And this is brilliant. And it's the same thing in a home. There's so many things that are out of our control. And so really knowing, what do you want to create in your home and in your classroom? This is where we start. And then we create language around that. So, for example, when our family went through our mental health crisis, I had to myself decide, what do I want to dream of for my home? What do I want to dream of for my marriage? What did it look like in the moment? It did not look like a dream. It looked like a nightmare. It looked like we weren't going to make it. But as I thought to myself, no, I want a marriage that is strong. I want us to be on the same page. I can only control me. So I had to create a plan of, how am I going to manage me if my husband doesn't decide to get on board? And that is key, because you can't control what your spouse, what your kids, what other people are doing. You can only decide, how are you going to manage you? But in that, what do you want to create? What do you want your home or your class to feel like? And what do you need to create that? Then we create language. So the language that I created for me, I had to create it for myself. I didn't pass this on to my kids. I didn't tell my husband, this is the way we're working. I did this for me. I had to create language that helped me figure out, this is how I'm going to see what I desire to create happen. So number one, I created my little mantra that helped me get through the hard days. I am brave. I show up when it's hard. I love without walls. I forgive when it hurts. I rise through the storm. I was creating language now that I could repeat to myself of what I wanted to create. I wanted a house of bravery. I wanted to show up when it's hard. I didn't want to run. I wanted to have my bags packed in the car. But what I really wanted was, I wanted to show up when it was hard. I wanted to be able to love without walls. I didn't want my kids to have to be the ones that affirm me. I wanted to be able to be the adult in the room. I wanted to be able to forgive, and I wanted to rise. I wanted our story to be one of, we rise through the storm. Now, how I did that was, I started to notice the skills that I needed in order to create this. And this is where the book Bring Them Closer came from. I noticed the process that I was having to go through. Number one, peace in my heart means peace in my home. This was helping me create language around what I wanted to create. If mom's okay, the house is probably okay. If the teacher's okay, the class might be okay. It starts with us. I realized that, oh, now that language, peace in my heart means peace in my home, was creating a framework that I could follow. Number two is this whole idea that behavior is communication. It now gave me a little box, an anchor to go, oh, instead of getting mad at the behaviors that I see, I'm going to get curious about what's underneath. Things like resilience is in the repair. That's language. And so when we think about what we want to create, we then create language that allows us to put a bit of a frame around it to understand it more. And if there's more than one person, what we need is we need to be able to communicate that with anyone else in the house or anyone else in the school. We need culture. Then we need a process on, okay, so what does that look like in our house? What does that look like in our school with all of our staff? One of the coolest things I got to do this year was work with the Surrey School Board. And I love Daniel Toe. Shout out to Daniel Toe, who is, rebelling a little bit against the whole idea of bringing in the consultant who's going to come in and do the Pro D day. I'm so done with those. If you've ever brought me in for a Pro D day, please, I'm not saying I don't want to come. But what I love what he decided to do was we created an entire coaching model, brought 6 principals and guidance counselors, and coached them over 6 sessions that they will now coach their teams on. We gave them language, we gave them a process, and now we're creating a system that allows for a culture to be created so that these teachers and schools know how to bring hurting kids closer. Who's this for? Well, it's for kids who are struggling with mental health and substance use, because that was the number one thing. Teachers are like, we don't know what to do with these kids. So we give them language, we give them a process. Here's your process. Here's your 6-step process on how you would bring that child closer. It's easy, it's not complicated. And then we create a system. That principal, when they move schools, they bring it to their new school. That school still has staff that understand the process. Their job is to pass that on. When do they pass it on? We do it through lunch and learns. We do it through our Pro-Ds, but we have a system now. What happens when we decide what culture we want to create? What do we want to dream of here? How do we want to design our environment? How do we want that to sound? And the process and the system, what happens is people stop feeling alone. When you're intentional about creating culture, people stop feeling alone. Now, how does that work in a house? Well, for me, I had to manage me, and I started to live out peace in my heart means peace in my home. I started to live out being curious about what's underneath behavior. I didn't expect my husband to get on board, but I'll tell you what, 5 years later, our family vibe is 100% different because these things are better caught than taught. I live it out. And what happens is that as I started to take autonomy and started to implement these things myself, I started to feel that sense of, you know what, I'm not alone here. I have the skills. And I know so many parents who need to know you have the skills. You just need the system. And that's what I love to do. That's why I come on this podcast. I want to give you free tools. Of course, I have things like the app coming out. It'll have a little bit of a fee every month. But again, Connie in your pocket, giving you a system, giving you language, giving you something that you can process through, that you can create so that you're not feeling isolated and alone. We as parents and as married couples or partnerships, we as teachers, we are culture creators. When we forget that we are culture creators, what happens is we become victim to what everybody else is not doing. And I don't know if I've ever shared my favorite quote on the definition of mental illness by Dr. Henry Cloud, who wrote an incredible book called Boundaries. He says that mental illness, basically the definition is demanding that life adapts to me. That's going to cause disorientation in your brain. If you expect everyone else to adapt to you, I mean, you're going to have a hard life. But the definition of mental health, according to Dr. Henry Cloud, is I can adapt to life. I can be autonomous and I can have agency over my life. But that comes from language. What do you want to create? Having a process of how you bring that out, and then a system. That's what I'm hoping that this app will give you. But in the very least, what I would love to leave you with is I want you to be thinking about, what do you want to create in your home, in your marriage, in your class? Start there. Start there. It's a great place to start. And then once you've got that, try to list out some language around it. What would that look like? What do the steps look like? It doesn't have to sound fancy. Resilience is in the repair. Sounds so fancy, but it just came out of me. I just noticed, oh, Resilience doesn't come from how perfect we live our lives. Resilience comes from how we repair our relationships. Don't worry about how fancy it sounds, just put some language around it. And then the third step would be, what's the process? What does that look like? And if you need help, reach out to me because I love helping parents and teachers and workplaces create this kind of culture. So you don't have to do this alone. But I wanted to, in this podcast, give you something very simple that you could follow to at least get the ball rolling. And you might be just like, I've got this. I could figure this out on my own. And that's fantastic. So whether you need help, whether you're like, tell me when that app is coming out because I need it, because that's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you a system and a process that you just follow every single day for 3 months. And that's going to set you up for success. And if you're like, I need to know when that app's coming out, let me know. Again, my email is connie@conniejacob.com. If you have thoughts on what you want that app to look like, email me. I'm doing a draw for a $100 Amazon gift card. I'm doing that on June 10th. If this is after June 10th, I still would value your input. So please feel free, even though the draw is over after June 10th, please email me anyways, because I want this to serve. I want to remind you that you are brave. Keep showing up when it's hard. Keep loving without walls. Keep forgiving when it hurts. You're going to rise through the storm.
All the rebels in the world stand up.